In the small, mist-shrouded town of Alders Hollow, there was a single road that twisted up into the nearby forest and disappeared into the trees. At the end of this road stood the Tower of Whispers, a forgotten stone structure whose purpose and origins had long since faded from local memory. But it wasn't the kind of place anyone wanted to ask questions about. My fascination with it began when I was young. The tower was forbidden. Stories circulated, passed down through the years about strange sounds, about people who disappeared into it and were never seen again. Yet, even knowing that, I could never quite shake the idea of going there. It was as if something was calling me from within those old stones. And on my 23rd birthday, after a night of restless sleep and strange dreams, I felt the pull grow stronger. I grabbed my coat and a flashlight and set out toward the tower. The night was eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from the leaves crunching underfoot and the distant echoing call of an owl. By the time I reached the clearing where the tower stood, a strange unease had settled in. The stone was old, cracked, and seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. The door was barely hanging on its hinges, and when I pushed it open, it gave way with a groan that echoed through the dark. The silence inside was thick, almost oppressive, and I felt a chill run down my spine as I stepped in. The air was stale, and the scent of damp stone hung heavily. My flashlight flickered as I swept it over the walls, which were lined with thick moss and, bizarrely, strange symbols etched into the stone. The symbols looked almost like letters, but none I had ever seen before. More like they were meant to convey a feeling rather than a word. The first few steps of the staircase were cloaked in darkness. I hesitated, taking in the worn stone, each step covered in dirt and debris. An unsettling feeling crept into my chest, but I took a deep breath and forced myself to climb. After a few flights, I heard it, the faintest murmur like a whisper caught in the draft of the winding staircase. I stopped, holding my breath, straining to hear. But as soon as I paused, the whispering stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. I shook it off as my imagination and kept moving. As I climbed, I felt an increasing sense of dread. The steps began to twist and narrow in strange, impossible ways, bending at odd angles, making me feel like I was walking through a dream that didn't quite adhere to the rules of reality. My flashlight flickered again, casting strange shadows that danced against the stone walls, shadows that looked too real, too detailed. They seemed to grow and stretch, sometimes resembling twisted faces that peered back at me, only to vanish the moment I tried to focus on them. A chilling whisper drifted through the air again, this time louder. It was a blend of voices, as if dozens of people were murmuring in unison. My heart pounded as I listened, trying to pick out a single word, but none made sense. It was like they were trying to speak but couldn't quite reach me. Then I saw it, a flash of movement just ahead on the stairs, a figure slipping around the corner just out of sight. I froze, gripping the flashlight tight. I hadn't heard anyone enter the tower, but something was here with me. Summoning every bit of courage I had, I took a cautious step forward. The walls seemed to close in around me as I climbed, the air thickening, becoming almost suffocating. My legs ached and my mind started to blur, thoughts becoming fractured and hazy, but I forced myself to keep moving. The whispers grew louder, morphing into low, mournful wails, filling the stairwell with a sound that seemed to vibrate within my skull. At last I reached a door at the top of the stairs. It was old, almost rotten, and I had to push hard to get it to budge. When it finally creaked open, I was met with a dimly lit room. In the center stood a single chair facing away from me. My heart pounded as I took in the room, the strange symbols carved into every inch of the walls, swirling in patterns that hurt my eyes if I looked too long. The figure sitting in the chair shifted, and a soft, shuddering breath escaped them. I couldn't see their face, but I could tell they were old, a thin figure hunched over, their clothes tattered and dusty. I should have left, but I couldn't move. I was transfixed, as if 1,000 invisible hands were holding me in place. Then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, they spoke. "You've come just like the others." The voice was frail but tinged with something ancient, something that seemed to reach back through the years. So many come and yet they never leave. The figure turned, and I caught a glimpse of their face, hollow eyes staring back at me from a withered face that seemed to belong more to a corpse than a living person. The skin was stretched thin, almost translucent, and there was a faint shimmer as if a thin layer of dust clung to them. Why do you stay here? I managed to ask, my voice barely more than a breath. The figure's hollow eyes bore into mine, and they reached out a bony hand pointing toward the door. There's a curse in these stones, child, they whispered. A curse that traps souls, feeds off them, twisting and contorting their essence into whispers that will never be heard. My pulse thundered in my ears. I stumbled back, but the figure continued, voice growing weaker. Each visitor is another whisper added to the tower. We become its voice, its heart. And soon you will too. I backed toward the door, but it slammed shut with a force that rattled the entire room. The air felt thick and heavy, and the whispers returned louder as if echoing off the walls. I tried the door, but it wouldn't budge, as though it were fused to the wall itself. The figure's mouth stretched into a grin, revealing rows of jagged, rotting teeth. They let out a dry, brittle laugh, the sound echoing around me, blending with the whispers. The room began to close in, the walls inching closer, and the whispers intensified, turning into a cacophony of voices, each one pleading, crying, some laughing with an unnatural glee. As I pressed myself against the door, struggling to break free, the voices began to overwhelm me. I could feel them, their stories, their pain, and their fears seeping into my mind, mingling with my own thoughts. Faces appeared in my mind, flashes of people who had stood here just like me, young, old, some barely more than children. I could feel them all, and I realized with a chilling certainty that they were trapped, bound to the stones of this cursed tower. And as I finally began to fade, as the cold, gnawing emptiness took hold of me, I heard the whispers begin to take on a new tone. They spoke not of fear or pain, but of a longing, a hunger. They were calling out, waiting for the next person to answer. The last thing I remember is the sound of the door creaking open once more. Footsteps echoed in the stairwell, slow and hesitant, and the whispers grew louder, eager, as they welcomed the next voice into their eternal fold. If you ever come across a road winding through the mist, leading to a tower at the edge of nowhere, don't follow it. Because the whispers are waiting, and they're always hungry for one more voice.